Tree felling can be very dangerous and should normally only be undertaken by a professional. However, we all have a tree or two on our land which is straightforward enough and isn't worth calling in a professional for. Unless you're absolutely confident and competent and have experience, you should never ever attempt to cut any trees which are near buildings, power lines or any other services, especially roads. Never attempt to do wind-blown trees, as they could be sprung-loaded, they could kick back, trap you or your saw, or even kill you. Never attempt anything that's out of the ordinary, because I cannot emphasize enough the dangers involved. And also you must make sure that the tree is sound one and not hollow or rotten in the middle, as this can adversely affect the direction of the tree and your safety. If you are going to attempt to fell a tree of any sort, you'll need a well-maintained serviceable saw. So first, we'll show you how to maintain and check that your saw is serviceable. This, as you can see, is a chainsaw, and this is one of the most effective tools for dropping trees. There are many things to watch out for, and the first thing is I cannot emphasize safety enough. This is a dangerous machine in the wrong hands, and the chain is turning at approximately 120 miles an hour when the saw is doing 14,000 revs. So this is obviously the chain. The chain is now turning freely. First thing you have to ensure before starting any work is ensure that the brake, the safety brake, which operates when you get what they call a kickback, and make sure that the chain cannot turn. So off, chain turns, on, chain does not turn. Basically, you have to make sure that your petrol mix is correct all the time, so you need to measure it carefully. I'm using a 50 to 1, 50 parts petrol to 1 part oil. Here, off on switch, always make sure that the off and on switch is working, because if ever anything goes wrong, you have to be able to turn the saw off immediately. That is also the choke for starting from cold. The choke also operates a half throttle position. So when you pull the throttle, it does release the choke back in and puts the saw back to a tick over position when she's warmed. You must not use a slack chain on a roll tip bar, otherwise it tends to come up underneath and groove the bar. You should turn the bar once a week if you're using it fairly regular, so that it evens out the wear on the bar. Also, you watch out for burrs on the bar, which will get wider than the chain and actually stop the chain cutting into the wood. Also, throughout the day, you have to monitor that the chain is getting enough oil, because sometimes you can get a blockage while in operation. You get signs like sparks coming off the bar, or even steam if the wood is wet. To check that the oil is coming through, I usually hold the saw against a piece of light coloured wood or something of that nature, and then rev the saw up, not actually touching the wood, to see the flick of the oil coming off the end of the bar. The other thing is, you must never use a blunt saw, because a blunt saw is dangerous. So if you happen to be cutting a tree that has any foreign matter in it, i.e. stones or nails or even shrapnel from the wartime, you stop immediately and sharpen the saw. The other point I cannot stress enough is you must not take your eyes off that chain while it is turning, and you keep your eyes on it until it has actually stopped. If you have to, put the brake on. This is my fuel can for the saw, which contains petrol in this end and oil in the other. It's a safety can really, because if it falls over it doesn't spill. And also, when you're filling the saw, you depress this nozzle, and when the saw is full it stops, so it saves you spilling petrol all over the saw, which is a fire risk anyway. As I said, the oil for the chain is contained that end. But on the can also I have a simple little tool. Each one of you's got one in the kitchen. This brush I use to remove any sawdust from around the fuel and oil caps, because the less foreign matter that goes into your tanks, then obviously you're going to save on maintenance and downtime. Also, I have my chain adjusting spanner and my two files, the round one obviously for sharpening the teeth, and the flat one for the depth control gauges on the chain. Right, well, I'm now going to fill my saw with petrol and oil, because these saws are set that they both run out about the same time. So if you run out of petrol, you will also be very low on oil. So you must always fill both each time you do it. I have already brushed the cap off previously and inject and as you can see, the petrol has stopped and does not spill all over the saw. Oil for the chain. And that's how to fill the saw. Right, well, as I mentioned earlier, if you do get a chain oil problem, I'll just run you quickly through how to check if the chain itself, the guideways of the chain and the oilways are clear, and show you how not to run your saw with a slack chain. Undo these two nuts here, slacken them. I'll just show you a slack chain first. Now, that is a slack chain. If your chain ever comes anything at all like that, do not attempt to use a saw, because that chain, if it comes off at speed, can give you a nasty cut in the leg. So anyway, to removing the cover now, you have to slacken the chain a little to get it off. This is also the cover which houses the safety brake. So you have to make sure that it's in the off position when you go to put the cover back on. Removal of the chain and back off the sprocket. Lay your chain down tidy so that you know when you put it back that the teeth are going the right way on the bar. Now, being as I'm taking this bar off, I'm going to clean the grooves in the bar with this little hook. Then you'll see how much of a build-up you get in the groove which is feeding the oil to the chain. Now, as you can see here, the oilway at the bottom, which wasn't in use, is already clogged. And being as we're going to turn the bar half a turn, so that we even the wear on the bar, we then have to make sure that the oilway, which was at the bottom and is now at the top to take in the oil from this space here, is clear. One of the main things is to keep obviously the faces that are between the steels clean, so that you get an even pull. Right, this bar was on that way, so when I put it back now, I'm going to put it on that way, making sure that that little oilway there is clear. Now just inspect the chain and make sure there are no hairline cracks on any of the links on either side. This one obviously shouldn't, because it's a brand new chain, but you inspect every link, because if you over tighten the chain perchance, you could get a split link, and these appear to be all correct. Next, we've got to remove all the dirt and grime from around the bar mounting. and just give it a little wipe. Because the oil comes out of there to feed the little hole in the bar. That's why it's such a long hole, because obviously as the chain wears, you tighten the chain with this little tensioner here, so it brings the hole forward, so that's why there's a long slot there, which is most important to keep clear. Right, having done that, we now move on to the cover. This is the spring which operates that little band there, which tightens around the sprocket here to stop the chain turning. Right, we'll just put the saw back together now, having made sure that the sprocket is turning freely on the front end of the bar. Make sure that the chain goes into the sprocket on the drive and on the front teeth. Pulling it up onto the tensioner, which is that little spigot there. Cover's nice and clean. And on with our nuts. Rear nut to the rear bolt, front nut to the front bolt, in case of any thread damage prior. Now then, when we come to tension the chain, the little tensioning screw is in here, which I showed you with the covers off. Also, when you're tensioning the chain, I'll turn the saw the other way from it for me to demonstrate this. You should always hold the front of the nose of the bar up so that you don't get a false reading on the tension of the chain. Now, it's just come tight now. You give it a little tweak again. Ensure that the chain turns freely by hand, and then it's still a little bit too slack there. I can pinch too much, so I'll give it another little tweak, and that is better. Holding the bar up still and tighten the nuts. Don't over tighten them, otherwise you'll only damage the threads. Right, well, that's the saw reassembled. Now I want to just make sure that the chain is sharp, because as I said before, a sharp chainsaw is the best one to have. These little teeth here are called rakers or depth gauges. If perchance you only sharpen the chain 3 or 4 or 5 times and then the saw still won't cut, it'll be down to these little depth gauges being too high, because they are what control the depth that tooth cuts. So here is a depth gauge, and as you can see, it's a new chain. But if they were high, you would file these down to that height so that each one would be the same. But whatever you do to a chain, you must do the same to each tooth. So if you give that one 3 swipes of the file, you must give all the ones on that side 3 swipes of the file. Same when sharpening the tooth with your round file. When you're using the round file, it's 30 degrees back, 10 degrees down. I'm exaggerating slightly here, obviously. And not pushing down on the file. You've got to keep the file so that it's going that way into the tooth. On some chains, there is a little line on top which gives you a guideline to follow when filing and sharpening. But as I said, each stroke and each tooth, same amount of strokes per tooth. All these chains have teeth on the right and left. So once you've finished the one side and you've sharpened one side, you then turn the saw around and then you do the other side. 30 degrees back, 10 degrees down. And then 2, 3. Also, check in the depth gauges. And if necessary, about 3 strokes of the file is generally plenty. Right then, this saw is ready to go.
So these are the trees you want to cut down today, are they?
Well, yes, the 3 of them ideally.
Yeah,
They've been here quite a few years now, but they're really just too big.
yeah,
They're too close to the buildings,
yeah.
and in the high winds they're getting quite dangerous now.
They are pretty close to the sheds, aren't they?
Yeah, they're
And if-
moving quite a lot at the top there,
Yeah,
and we're getting a few branches coming down as well.
that's right. If they come down, they'll make a mess of the sheds, won't they?
They would, and they've just got to go.
Because they're about 70 foot, 75 foot high. So, well, this tree by here now, so, well, this easy one, you'll drop down to the field, down that way. And no problem.
Good.
We're coming back to this one now. This one is leaning just a little that way. So we'll drop him, he'll go down sort of by the side of the gate post, down here, straight down.
Fine.
But when you come up to this one here, now this tree by here, now this tree too is leaning up that way towards the buildings. And we've got cables then out of the road, so we can't drop him that way, so we'll have to leave this one today,
Oh, I see.
and you'll have to get a long rope and a tractor on the end of it to pull him the right way, because there's too much lean on the upper side.
Right. Okay then. I can leave you to it.
Yeah, okay.
Fine.
And we'll get these 2 down now to start with,
That's great.
and we'll have to come back to get this one down.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Di.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we've come to cut the tree. Before you start cutting any trees, you've got to make sure the safety. What I mean by safety is electric cables above and also electric cables in the ground, which when the tree comes down, doesn't go in. Any sewerage, piping, or any mains water that runs through the ground, or if there's any piping that's going to troughs, and other various things. And you double check that before you start cutting. And also what you've got to be careful about is any bridleways, footpaths, things like that which people might be walking on, and that you're cutting the tree down either close to the bridle path or across the bridle path, that either you've got to have signs each end with plenty of distance to warn the people that there's tree cutting going on, and then you'll be safe. Or if you've got some friends, to make sure they can stand each side, that to stop anybody walking past. And also, if you're cutting any trees down or small trees on the road side, you've got to notify the police, and you've got to either ask them, can they have any lights out, or can you have somebody to come out for watch on the road when the trees are coming down, so that you're safe yourself and you don't injure nobody else on the roads. There's another safety point to watch, is the weather. The weather is the main factor. If you've got high winds, you can't cut a tree, because when you're cutting through, you don't know which way the tree goes and it can come on top of you. The second point is stormy, thunder and lightning. When you get lightning, it can strike the tree, run down the tree, and it'll come to the saw and kill you. The third point is frosty weather. When you've got ice around the tree and frost in the ground, it's slippery. You won't get good foot conditions. So whatever you do, don't do it on ice, lest you'll have the saw into your legs or your hands. It's important to know when you're cutting a big tree down how long the tree is and where the tree is going to drop. So I'm walking down here now, and I'm going to stop just down by here now, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my hat off and I'm going to open my legs and bend down. When I put my head between my legs, if I can see the top of the tree, I know roughly the top will land by where I'm standing. I can just see the top of the tree between my legs, so when the tree falls, the top will roughly land where my feet are now. It's a good thing when you go and cut these big trees not to have too many people with you, because too many people can cause accidents, too many things to watch. So when you go and cut them, always take one lookout with you. He can act for two jobs. He'll act as a lookout and he'll be there if you have an accident. My lookout has got to be at least 2 lengths of the tree away from where you're cutting. For my own safety here now, I got to work out the danger zone. What the danger zone is, where the tree is going to fall. So I'm looking up at this tree here now, and this tree is leaning forward. It's leaning down. So this will drop straight down the field. And I'm also looking up there, it's very heavily branched on this side. So what I'll do now, I'll stand by in front of the tree and I'll say 10 to and 10 past. That's the danger zone on this tree. Imagine if you was looking at a clock. Every tree is different. There's not one the same. So when you look up a tree and it's branched heavier one side than the other, you know roughly which way it's going to go. Or if there's a bend, you go for the weight of the tree and that's where it's coming down. So every tree gets a different danger zone. There's more on some and less on others. Once you've worked your danger zone out, you can go on to the escape route. The reason you've got to have an escape route, when the tree drops to the floor, it can either spring back and hit you or pin you against something else. My escape route for this tree today is straight back behind. When you're coming back, make sure that it's all clean, free, easy to run. You don't want nothing underneath so you fall over. The tree that we're cutting today is free from any branches and it's clean access for the escape route. But if we were cutting this tree by here now, that's got small trees growing out of it, and there's some small young trees growing this side, and if there's any branches that growing on the trunk up to your shoulder height, cut them off, have them all clean before you start dropping the tree. Don't go cutting over your shoulder height, it's too dangerous, the saw might come back into your face. And also on this tree now, there's obstructions here, like that drum and the trailer parked by here, that spoils the